Dear hearts, welcome back. If you found this story tonight, it means your soul still believes in kindness. I want to feel your presence. Snow fell softly outside. Each flake caught the streetlight, dancing down like tiny prayers. The old Honda Civic sat parked under the flickering lamppost on Maple Street, its windows fogged with the breath of three people trying to stay warm. Inside, 7-year-old Cordelia Jane Murphy pressed her small nose against the cold glass, watching other children through lit windows of real houses, their Christmas trees twinkling like stars she could never reach. "Mama, will Santa know we live in the car now?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the cramped space, it sounded like thunder. Bethany Murphy adjusted the threadbare blanket around her daughter's shoulders, her own breath visible in the December air. At 28, she looked older, worn down by months of sleeping in parking lots and 24-hour diners. Her once bright blue sweater was now faded and stretched, but she kept it clean for Cordelia's sake. The sweater had been a gift from her mother 3 Christmases ago, back when phone calls home were filled with laughter instead of careful omissions about their living situation. "Of course he will, sweetheart. Santa always knows where good little girls are." But even as she said it, Bethany's heart cracked a little more. They had been living in the car for 3 months now, ever since the eviction notice came. Her job at the diner barely covered gas and food, certainly not enough for a security deposit on a new apartment. She watched her daughter's breath fog the window and knew that in 2 days, on Christmas morning, she would have nothing to give except empty promises and leftover hope. The hardest part wasn't the cold or the discomfort. It was the way Cordelia had stopped asking about friends from school, stopped mentioning birthday parties she couldn't attend, because they had no address for invitations. It was the way her bright, curious daughter had learned to make herself smaller, quieter, as if taking up less space might somehow make their situation easier. "But we don't have an address anymore," Cordelia said, turning from the window. "How will the post office tell Santa where to find us?" Bethany's throat tightened. Last week, Cordelia had asked the librarian if she could use the library's address for Santa's letters. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, had been kind but confused, and Bethany had quickly made an excuse about their mail being delayed. The shame had burned in her chest for days. Bethany closed her eyes, fighting back tears. How do you explain homelessness to a child who still believes in magic? How do you tell her that the real world doesn't work like fairy tales? "We'll figure it out, baby. We always do." She thought about the phone call she'd avoided making to her sister in Oregon. Rachel had called twice last week, leaving cheerful voicemails about Christmas plans and asking when they were coming to visit. Bethany had deleted the messages without responding. How do you tell your little sister, who still sees you as the brave one who moved to California to chase dreams, that those dreams had crumbled into sleeping in a car? 3 blocks away, in the glass tower that dominated the downtown skyline, Prescott Harrison Blackwood, Forrest sat in his corner office, staring at the city lights below. At 45, he was the youngest CEO in his company's history, having inherited Blackwood Development from his father 2 years ago. His tailored charcoal suit cost more than most people made in a month. His office was decorated with awards recognizing his success in luxury real estate development. But tonight, success fell hollow. The weight of his father's legacy pressed down on him like a physical thing. Harrison Blackwood III had built an empire on the simple principle that real estate was about numbers, not people. "Emotions are expensive, son," he'd said countless times. "Leave them out of business decisions." Prescott had internalized that lesson so completely that he'd forgotten it was a choice, not a law of nature. The annual board meeting had ended an hour ago, and the numbers were impressive. Blackwood Development had acquired and demolished 6 low-income housing complexes this year, replacing them with high-end condominiums that sold for 10 times what the original residents could afford. The board applauded. The shareholders celebrated. Prescott felt sick. He kept thinking about the faces he'd seen during the eviction proceedings. He'd told himself he was too busy to attend them personally, but the truth was he couldn't bear to see the consequences of his decisions. The reports from his property managers were clinical, sanitized. Residents relocated successfully, they'd write. But relocated where? To what kind of life? His secretary, Valentina Rodriguez, knocked on the door. She was 62, had worked for the company for 25 years, and was the only person who dared to speak honestly to him. She'd been his father's secretary too, and had watched Prescott grow from a boy who built elaborate Lego cities to a man who demolished real ones. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm heading home. You should too. It's Christmas Eve tomorrow. Val, can I ask you something?" He turned from the window, loosening his silver tie. "When you were growing up, did your family ever struggle financially?" Valentina studied his face, seeing something she hadn't noticed before. A crack in the armor he'd worn since taking over the company. "We did. There were times when my parents chose between paying rent and buying food." "Why do you ask?" "I've been thinking about the families we displaced this year. The Riverside Apartments, the Elm Street complex. Where do you think they all went?" Valentina's expression softened. She'd been wondering when he would ask this question. The lucky ones found other places. The others... She shrugged sadly. "Some are probably living in their cars, Mr. Blackwood. Some are in shelters. Some are scattered to wherever they could find a bed." Cars. The word came out strangled. People are living in cars. "Families, Mr. Blackwood. Children. I drive past the park sometimes and see them. In the morning, before school, you'll see kids getting ready in the public bathrooms. Their parents try to make it look normal, but you can see the exhaustion in their eyes." Prescott felt something twist in his chest. "I never thought about it that way. Your father did what he thought was best for business. But business and compassion don't always have to be enemies." Valentina hesitated, then added, "He wasn't always that way, you know. When I first started working here, he used to know the names of all the tenants. He'd walk through the properties, fix things himself sometimes. But after your mother died..." She didn't finish the sentence, but Prescott understood. His father had hardened after cancer took his wife, had buried his grief in work and profit margins. Prescott had learned to do the same, to see numbers instead of people, to make decisions based on logic instead of conscience. After Valentina left, Prescott couldn't concentrate. He kept thinking about families sleeping in cars, about children who might not have addresses for Santa to find them. The thought seemed absurd, but it wouldn't leave him alone. He pulled up the files on the Riverside Apartments demolition. 48 families had been displaced. 48 families with children, elderly grandparents, people with disabilities. The property manager had noted that most residents found alternative housing, but now Prescott wondered what that euphemism really meant. On impulse, he grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. He told himself he was just going for a drive, clearing his head, but something was pulling him toward the older part of town, where the streetlights were dimmer and the dreams were smaller. Back in the Honda, Cordelia had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder. Bethany stroked her daughter's hair, humming softly to keep her own despair at bay. The car smelled like the French fries they'd shared for dinner, and the heater had stopped working properly weeks ago. She studied her daughter's face in the dim light. Cordelia had her father's stubborn chin and her own green eyes, but she was becoming someone entirely her own. Even in these impossible circumstances, she found ways to be generous. Yesterday, she'd given half her school lunch to a classmate who'd forgotten theirs. When Bethany had gently explained that they needed to be careful with food, Cordelia had said, "But Mama, sharing makes a good feeling bigger, not smaller." Bethany thought about the letter hidden in her purse, the one she'd written to her sister in Oregon. She'd been too proud to send it, too ashamed to admit that the confident young woman who'd moved to California with big dreams was now homeless with a child depending on her. But pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The letter began, "Dear Rachel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise not to try to fix it right away. I just need you to know that I'm not the success story I pretended to be, but I'm not a failure either. I'm just someone who got knocked down and is still figuring out how to get back up." A tap on the window made her jump. Through the fog glass, she saw a tall man in an expensive coat, his breath visible in the cold air. Her first instinct was fear, but something in his posture seemed non-threatening. He looked nervous, almost apologetic. She cracked the window an inch. "Can I help you?" "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Prescott Blackwood. I was just walking and I noticed. Are you okay? Do you need help?" The name hit her like a slap. Blackwood Development, the company that had bought and demolished the Riverside Apartments, her last real home. The reason she and Cordelia were sleeping in a car. "We're fine," she said curtly, rolling the window back up, but Prescott didn't leave. He stood there for a moment, then walked to a nearby bench and sat down, not approaching, not threatening, just present. Bethany watched him to the rear-view mirror, this stranger who had unknowingly turned her life upside down. He sat with his head in his hands, and for a moment, he looked less like a powerful businessman and more like someone carrying a weight he couldn't bear. After 20 minutes, curiosity got the better of Bethany. She rolled the window down again. "What do you want?" "I want to understand," he said quietly. "I want to know what I've done." "What you've done?" Bethany's voice was bitter. "You've turned families into profit margins. You've made homelessness a business model. The Riverside Apartments? Building B, apartment 237. That was our home for 4 years. Cordelia took her first steps in that living room. She learned to ride her bike in that courtyard. Until your company decided it wasn't profitable enough." Prescott felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much, but I am truly sorry. Sorry doesn't get us an apartment. Sorry doesn't give my daughter a bed to sleep in. Sorry doesn't explain to a 7-year-old why her address doesn't exist anymore." The anger in her voice was real, but underneath it, Prescott heard something else. Exhaustion. The kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes from fighting a system that seems designed to keep you down. "Tell me about apartment 237, he said quietly. Bethany was startled by the request. "What?" "Tell me what it was like. What you lost when we tore it down." She stared at him, suspicious. "Why?" "Because I need to understand what I've been doing to people." For a moment, Bethany considered staying silent, but something in his face, a genuine pain that seemed to echo her own, made her speak. "It was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. The kitchen faucet leaked and the carpet was old, but it was ours. Cordelia had her own room for the first time in her life. She painted butterflies on the walls. I helped her mix the colors. There was a window that caught the morning sun, and she'd sit there with her cereal and tell me about her dreams." Prescott listened, and with each detail, he felt the weight of what he'd destroyed. Not just a building, but a home. Not just an investment, but a life. "The neighbors were good people," Bethany continued. "Mrs. Chun in 235 watched Cordelia after school when I had to work late. The Johnsons in 241 always invited us for Sunday dinner. It was the first place where we felt like we belonged somewhere. Where did they all go? I don't know. We all scattered. I heard Mrs. Chin moved in with her daughter in Fresno. The Johnsons found a place across town, but the rent is twice what they were paying. Their teenage son had to change schools in his senior year. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the situation settling between them. Finally, Prescott spoke again. "What's your daughter's name?" "Cordelia." "She's 7. Is she worried about Christmas?" Bethany's voice cracked. "She's worried Santa won't find us because we don't have an address. She asked me if homeless kids get presents, and I didn't know what to tell her." Something broke open in Prescott's chest. He thought about his own childhood, about the massive house with 12 bedrooms, about Christmas mornings with piles of presents under a tree that touched the ceiling. He thought about his father, who had built an empire but never taught him what it cost. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "When I was 7, I wrote a letter to Santa asking him to bring me a friend. Not a toy, not a game, just someone to talk to. My father was always working, and my mother was already sick. The house was huge, but it felt empty. Did Santa bring your friend? No, but maybe he was just waiting for the right time." Cordelia stirred in her mother's arms, blinking sleepily. When she saw the stranger outside, she sat up straighter. "Who's that, Mama?" "Just a man, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." But Cordelia was curious. She rolled down the window herself, despite her mother's protests. "Are you Santa?" she asked innocently. Prescott almost smiled. "No, I'm not Santa, but I know him." "Really? Will you tell him where we are? We don't have an address anymore. I will. What would you like me to tell him? Cordelia thought seriously. Tell him we're in the blue car under the streetlight. Tell him Mama tries really hard, but sometimes being a grown-up is too heavy for her. Tell him I don't need toys, just a place where we can be warm and safe. The simplicity of her request broke something in Prescott that had been carefully constructed over years of business dealings. This child, who had lost everything, wasn't asking for toys or games. She was asking for the most basic human need, shelter. Prescott felt tears he hadn't shed in years burning behind his eyes. I'll tell him exactly that. What's your name? Cordelia asked. Prescott. That's a fancy name. Are you rich? Cordelia, Bethany warned, but Prescott held up a hand. I have a lot of money, he said honestly, but I'm not sure that makes me rich. Mama says being rich means having enough to share. Do you have enough to share? The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Prescott thought about his penthouse apartment, his expensive car, his investment portfolio. He thought about the millions he made tearing down homes to build luxury condos. I think I'm just starting to understand what that means, he said. The next morning was Christmas Eve. Bethany woke to find an envelope slipped under her windshield wiper. Inside was a key and an address, along with a note written in careful handwriting. Mrs. Murphy, this is not charity. This is an apology. The apartment at 1247. Oak Street is yours for as long as you need it. Rent is paid through the end of next year. There's a job waiting for you at Henderson Elementary if you want it. They need someone in the front office who understands what families go through. The apartment is furnished, but empty of judgment. Merry Christmas. Someone who's learning that wealth without compassion is just expensive poverty. Bethany read the note 3 times, her hands shaking. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, as if each word had been chosen with purpose. At the bottom, in smaller print, was a phone number and the words, "Call if you need anything." I mean that. Cordelia woke up and saw her mother crying. Mama, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, baby. Everything's right. Santa found us. They drove to Oak Street with the morning sun streaming through the windshield. The apartment was a modest but well-maintained building with a small playground visible from the front steps. The key fit perfectly, and the door opened to reveal a space that was simple but complete. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen stocked with basics, and in the living room, a small Christmas tree with a single present underneath. But what struck Bethany most was the thoughtfulness of the details. The refrigerator was stocked with Cordelia's favorite foods. The medicine cabinet contained children's vitamins and the specific brand of shampoo Cordelia used. Someone had paid attention to more than just their basic needs. Cordelia ran to the tree, her eyes wide. The present was wrapped in silver paper with a tag that read, "For Cordelia, a friend from Santa." Inside was a snow globe containing a tiny house with a red door and 2 small figures visible in the window. When she shook it, the snow swirled around the house like a protective embrace. "Look, Mama, it's us." Bethany sank into the couch, overwhelmed. Through the window, she saw Prescott standing across the street, watching. When their eyes met, he nodded once and walked away. But he didn't go far. That evening, Bethany found him sitting on the front steps of the building, looking uncertain. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." "It's more than okay. It's perfect. But I have to ask, why did you do all this?" Prescott was quiet for a long moment. "Because your daughter asked me a question I couldn't answer. She asked if I had enough to share. I realized I've been spending my whole life accumulating things, but I'd never actually shared anything that mattered." "This matters," Bethany said softly. "It's the first thing I've done in years that feels real." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Cordelia play in the small playground. She was making friends with other children in the building, her laughter carrying on the evening air. "She's resilient," Prescott observed. "She's had to be, but she shouldn't have to be, not at 7. "No," he agreed. "She shouldn't." Later that afternoon, Bethany called the number on the job offer. The principal, Mrs. Chun, was warm and understanding. "Mr. Blackwood explained your situation. We need someone who can help families navigate difficult times. When can you start? After New Year's, if that's okay. Perfect. And Mrs. Murphy? Welcome home. That evening, as Cordelia played with her snow globe, Bethany sat at the kitchen table writing 2 letters. The first was to her sister in Oregon, sharing the news of their good fortune. The second was to Prescott Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, I spent months hating you for what your company did to us. But I realize now that you are not your father's choices. You are your own man, making your own decisions. What you did for us wasn't obligation or guilt. It was kindness, and kindness is always a choice. Thank you for choosing us, for choosing better. If you ever need a friend, you know where to find us. Bethany Murphy. She slipped a letter under his office door that night, along with a small gift, a Christmas ornament Cordelia had made from construction paper and glitter. It was a simple house with stick figures in the window, and the words, "Home is where love lives," written in a 7-year-old's careful handwriting. Prescott found the letter and ornament the next morning, Christmas Day. He had come to the office not to work, but because he had nowhere else to go. His penthouse felt as empty as ever, but now the emptiness had a different quality. It felt temporary, like a space waiting to be filled. He called Valentina, even though it was Christmas. "Val, I need you to set up a meeting with the board. I want to start a new division of the company. Affordable housing development. I want to build homes for families who need them." "That's wonderful, Mr. Blackwood. But why are you calling me on Christmas?" "Because I finally understand what my father never taught me. Business isn't about taking from people. It's about giving them something they need. Your father will be proud of who you're becoming. I hope so. But more than that, I hope I can be someone my mother would have been proud of." 6 months later, the first Blackwood community housing complex opened on the lot where the old Riverside apartments had stood. The units were beautiful, affordable, and designed with families in mind. Prescott insisted on one special feature. Every front door was painted bright red, so children would never have trouble telling Santa where they lived. Bethany still worked at Henderson Elementary, where she had become the person families called when they needed help navigating crisis. She kept the snow globe on her desk, and sometimes parents would ask about it. "It's a reminder," she would tell them, "that home isn't just a place. It's a feeling, and feelings can be found even when everything else seems lost." Her office became a safe space for families in crisis. She kept a drawer full of gift cards for groceries, a closet stocked with children's clothes, and a list of resources that went far beyond what the school officially provided. Parents would come to her not just for help, but for hope. Cordelia thrived in school and made friends easily. She still believed in Santa, but now she understood that sometimes Santa worked through people who chose to be kind. She kept a snow globe by her bed, and every night before sleep, she would shake it and watch the snow swirl around the tiny house. "See, Mama, even when everything is shaken up, the house stays safe inside." In his office, Prescott kept Cordelia's handmade ornament hanging from his desk lamp year-round. It reminded him that wealth wasn't about accumulating possessions, but about having enough to share. He never married, never had children of his own, but he became a father figure to dozens of families through his housing programs. The board had initially resisted his shift toward affordable housing, but the projects proved profitable in ways that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. The communities they built were stable, the families grateful and hardworking. Property values in surrounding areas increased, and Blackwood development gained a reputation that attracted investors who wanted to be part of something meaningful. Prescott also established a scholarship fund for children who had experienced homelessness. Cordelia was the first recipient, and she used it to study social work in college. She wanted to help other families the way her family had been helped. On quiet Christmas Eves, he would walk to the neighborhoods his company had built, past houses with red doors and children's toys in the yards. He would think about a little girl who would worry that Santa wouldn't find her, and smile at the knowledge that love always finds a way to arrive exactly when it's needed most. Years later, when Cordelia graduated from college, she invited Prescott to the ceremony. As she walked across the stage, she looked out into the audience and saw him sitting next to her mother, both of them beaming with pride. "I have 2 families now," she told her friends. The one I was born into, and the one I found when I needed it most. The snow globe still sits on Cordelia's nightstand, now that she's grown and has children of her own. When they worry about the future, she shows them the tiny house safely protected inside the glass, and tells them the story of how their grandmother learned that home isn't just an address. It's a promise that someone, somewhere, cares enough to make sure you're never truly lost. And sometimes, when life shakes you up and everything feels uncertain, the most important thing is not how you fell, but who helps you remember that you're still safe inside something bigger than yourself. The story of Cordelia and Prescott became legend in their small city. People would point to the red doors and tell their children about the businessman who learned that true wealth comes from lifting others up. And children would write letters to Santa, not just asking for toys, but asking him to help them find ways to be kind to others. Because kindness, they learned, is the best gift you can give. And unlike toys that break or clothes that are outgrown, kindness grows stronger every time it's shared.